My name is Professor Johnny Eric Williams, and I'm a professor at Trinity College, Hartford, Connecticut. My earliest memory of the library was fourth grade in Little Rock, Arkansas, in my elementary school, and going to the library with my teacher. At that time, the schools were still segregated in Little Rock, and so all the teachers were black, and they were teaching us the Dewey Decimal System and how to check out a book and so forth. That's my earliest experience with the library as an elementary school student. I didn't really start thinking about libraries really seriously until I got to really grad school, not even undergrad. When I was in high school, I took this class. It was called World Histories and Civilizations. And I remember the teacher's name. It's Miss Wimberly. And she was so excited about history and civilization and stuff like that. And we went all the way back to ancient Africa, the ancient Egyptians, even before the ancient Egyptians. And this was a professor she was a white teacher who was giving a predominantly black class this information about Africa, which I had never heard before. It got me very, very excited, and I wanted to write about it. And so she said, well, you want to do a paper on this? And I go, yeah. And then she said, well, you need to go to the library, do some reading, some research, and gather some books. And so I started to do that. And it's the first time I really, really started to see beyond the state of Arkansas. In the United States, I started to see that's tremendous human history that is out there that I didn't know about as a young high schooler. That got me started. I was an undergraduate student, not a grad student, when I started to go to the Little Rock Public Library to read magazines, periodicals primarily, newspapers from around the world because I was curious about the world. I've always been an avid consumer of news. And at that time, my conception of news was very limited, but I wanted to expand it to, say, Mexico, Canada, and then to Central America, and then to Europe and Africa. So that's when I started to read more broadly about what was going on in the world, contemporary issues in the world. And so the library became important for that. That was the only place I could get that kind of information from. Well, I started to work in the library. I got a job at my graduate institution in Boston, Brandeis University. I was the first person that someone ran into at the reference desk. And so I was being trained by reference librarians to do reference work for undergraduates at Brandeis University and eventually for graduate students and professors at Brandeis University. So that's how I got into libraries even more. And that's why I started to read even more and to be exposed to even more in that library experience itself. First of all, if you read a lot, it will expand your ability to write well as your vocabulary. So I noticed that was a marked improvement in the way I wrote, even as a high schooler, all the way up to grad school. And I read voraciously even today. I've already read this morning to about 50 newspapers from around the world already, online. And I got that from being an avid reader in the library, as well as my high school experience with Miss Wimberly, because she was an avid reader too. And so I was like, how do you know all this stuff? She said, I read. He said, I have never been to these places, but I want to go. Now, I have gone to them as a professor. I've gone to these places and seen for myself the importance of reading to basically expand the vocabulary, but also your ability to think critically about the world and your role in it and your ability to transform the world to make it into a better place. Libraries are, and they continue to be, even here in Connecticut, places where people can come together from the community and hold events and commune with one another and learn from one another. If you can't afford to buy a book or to get computer access, libraries provide that. They are resources of knowledge. If you want that knowledge, it's there. And that's why they're so important, right? They can inform the public, create an informed public about how it is that they should proceed living, right, in a society such as the United States. Everybody can afford to buy those books. Everybody can afford to get access to the internet or even just to have these kinds of informal meetings. And little kids go in and I remember doing this with my kids in the library where I am. Take them there and there's a reading period where you will have a librarian read a book to a little kid and excite their imagination about reading further. And when my kids were young, they kept asking me, Dad, could you read that book that the librarian read? Dad, could you read this book to me? And so forth, when they couldn't read. And now my kids are avid readers now. I'm not talking about, social media is there, but they read books and they read newspapers and stuff like that because they see me and my wife doing it in the house ourselves rather than just watching TV or being on, like I said, social media. If I were to go back to my 10-year-old self, I would probably, in the summertime, I would be there a lot more than I was. Even though I had fun in the summertime doing kid stuff, but also I think it's important to continue to read over the summer and get into the habit of reading so that you will never stop. The most important part for me is to read and compare what different venues are saying and to try to come to some understanding of what's actually happening, because Just because you're reading doesn't mean it's the truth. These are social constructions created by human beings, and they are not infallible. So we need to do some comparative work and to get the real history of what's going on for ourselves. So I think that's what I would have told my 10-year-old self to do, right? To read a lot more and not to watch so much TV. The best piece of advice I ever received and why did it stick with me? There's two versions of what was important for me in different phases of my life. My grandmother, who was a woman who was illiterate and could not read, who signed her name with an X, told me that I should always get as much knowledge as I possibly can because no one can ever take that from me. Even if they kill you, they still can't take it. And for me, what she was saying was the first transformative place that happens for a human being, especially for me as she was interested in me, was in the transformation of my mind. That's where, for her, the revolution occurred first. And then once that revolution occurs in your mind, then it will transform the way you behave in the world. So that's one. The second piece of advice I got at a different stage, say at grad level, it's an old Army saying, I don't know if I can say it on this and I want to get vulgar. Embrace the suck and move the fuck forward. And that's a mantra that I have, and I always do that. The world, well, most of the time, it's not a nice place. As a matter of fact, one can characterize it as hell. But you have to live, and you got to find some joy in your life. And so I embrace it, and I move forward. And that's what I do. So I think that's what all human beings should do, and I'm doing that. What advice would I give young fathers about the importance of libraries? Well, I would phrase it this way. What advice would I give young fathers about the important role of connecting with your child in the library? You connect with your children when you take them to the library. You watch a film with them in the library. You sit there and read some comic strips in the library with them or something like that. This is about socializing with your kid and connecting with your kid. And the library provides that kind of venue for that. But it also provides you with the ability to transform the way in which you think about the world because you're reading and they see you doing it and your joy in that. Because at some point, your child will go to school. At some point, they will start to hate reading in a formal education setting. And why do they start to hate it? Because it's so regimental. And they're not having the experiences that they had in the library. That reading and learning can be fun. It's not just rote learning and memory regurgitation and so forth. It's applied. Young fathers should understand that the connectedness that they get and what they're doing, not only for their kids, but also for themselves. This is a thesis of Haki Matabutu, who is from Chicago. It is an old thesis. And it's not just a thesis, really. You can look historically at the assault on Black people, period, to keep us illiterate, to necessitate that we can be more exploitable. They can extract property from us, wealth from our free labor and stuff like that. And there were laws against teaching us to read. So one thing that people don't know is that shortly after enslavement ended, Black people immediately started to create educational institutions within church basements and places like that. During slavery and shortly after that, we were 90-some% illiterate. By the turn of the 20th century, that illiteracy rate had been erased. Most people don't know that, how important education is to us and libraries as a result, right? We wanted to read and know so we can educate ourselves about how to be transformative and embrace our power. Because when you start to read, you get a sense of empowerment from the fact that you can make changes in the world. That's important from my perspective, what he's saying. And this continues to go on today with the integration movement, right? I know it's going to sound controversial, but this is actually what happened, at least in my home state of Arkansas. When integration happened, it was also a means by which the white supremacists in the society decided that they could undermine literacy in the Black community by giving Black people a certain education. And that education would limit their ability to know their history. I started off telling you the first time I fell in love with the library was through my teachers who were Black. Well, that was lost because of the connection. In the white supremacist society, teachers don't see other people as fully human. They don't see themselves in those kids. And as a result, those kids got a poor quality education. And that's what's going on even now. Say, you can look at a city that I'm in right now, Hartford. A lot of the teachers in Hartford are white, even though the majority of the students are Black and Latino. But that was a deliberate design of segregation because in Arkansas, they got rid of the Arkansas Teachers Association, which was an all-Black teachers union. They got rid of it. They fired all the teachers when they integrated. That was a hard, long fight. And what it did was to try to do that. That is to take away the literacy and our understandings of self. Haki Matabutu said that long time ago, but it's not new. I mean, Frederick Douglass was saying this stuff. And so this is not a controversial thesis per se. It's an historical fact. A funny story about passion for education. My passion was really political. I always wanted to be, because I looked up to Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and in the 1980s, Jesse Jackson. I thought they were tremendous change agents, and I wanted to get into politics. And so when I was an undergrad, I majored in sociology and political science because I thought I was going to go to law school and eventually run for public office. But during that process, though, I was a track and field guy, and I got hurt, and they took my scholarship away, and so I had to join the military to finish college. I was trying to stay out of the military, active duty-wise, when first I went to law school, and I hated law school, but then I decided to pursue a PhD, and I fell into being an educator. I didn't think I would be great at it. As a matter of fact, I thought I was terrible. It didn't dawn on me that I could make a career out of this until my dissertation defense. When the chair of my dissertation committee said to me, "You have a gift." I was like, "What are you talking about? A gift of what?" "You can teach." And I remember that to this day. And he's still alive. And he was very influential on getting me to think of myself as first a teacher, but then second, an intellectual. And I think both go hand in hand, really. I don't know of any teachers who are not intellectual. I make a distinction between academics and intellectuals. I am not an academic. Academics seek to conform and subdue students. I'm an intellectual. I seek to basically advocate and get them to think critically about the world so they can change it. I was on active duty. I got off. I finished my PhD in 94. And I got 2 job offers. One at Ramapo College in New Jersey, which I wanted to go to, and one at Colorado College in Colorado Springs. And both a liberal arts school, one public institution, one private institution. My wife wanted to change of venue. She's from Boston, so she said, "Why don't we go west to Colorado?" And so we went west, even though I really didn't want to go west. And I taught at Colorado College, and then she decided that she would get a master's degree in cultural communications at NYU, and so I followed her back here. She wanted me to move to Massachusetts so she can commute down that way, and I said I would never live in the state of Massachusetts again. I lived there for 12 years. I didn't want to live there anymore, especially eastern Massachusetts. So this was the compromise, Connecticut, and then I lucked up and found a job here. It was actually 2 institutions that I looked at to work at. Trinity was one, and the other one was Wesleyan University. I ended up here. It's very important. I ask my students to constantly use the library, even though they are very reticent about going to the library. I know how libraries work because I worked at them throughout my graduate career, which was 7, 8 years long. So I know the ins and outs, and even now the libraries are more digital than they are with former hard copies and stuff like that. When that whole process of digitalization started, I was a part of that. And now to see what it is today, it's easily accessible stuff. I used to go through the card catalogs and figure out where to go find books so that I can get my research done. Now you don't have to do that. You can go on the search engines and Google this stuff, and it's all been digitized so you can find it online. Now, at this college, what we have is a consortium. Well, since we can't house every book, we can share it with certain colleges in the region. And so we do interlibrary loan to get that kind of information. So any resource that you want to read from around the world, we can get access to it easily to read. And students, even though they have access to all of this information, they're some of the most misinformed people I've ever encountered. So for me, libraries are important because they provide the venues to understand the world. My research is all about that. Right now, I'm working on a book called The Persistence of White Sociology. And I'm reading all kinds of stuff that I'm getting from libraries. You can go into the archive of libraries and look at old stuff, the original stuff, and read it. These are all important things for my research. I travel around the world to go into archives and stuff like that at libraries to check stuff out. Libraries around the world, they're like vessels of history, human history. If we didn't have those libraries, especially where civilization began on the African continent, which those libraries are still around, we wouldn't have a sense of who we are because we wouldn't be historically rooted. So I think libraries are important for that reason. The libraries are important. I sleep here. I do my work here. You can socialize here. You eat in here. You can do all the things you want in this library and get tremendous amount of knowledge. Not just in print form, visual form, socializing form by talking to other people. So it is very, very crucial for the development of, say, a student as a human being to have libraries. So Hartford Library is providing some history of the region. Now, does it provide all the history that predated its establishment before, say, this country called the United States? What about the history of the indigenous folk who were here before? So we need that history, too. I know there are places that we can go to. There's a museum at the Massachusetts that they try to provide us with information about the Massachusetts and the Pequot and so forth. But there needs to be more of that within the existing public library system. We also got to recognize, though, that the Hartford Public Library was created by the settler, and that knowledge has been warped to some extent and slanted towards a particular point of view, and we got to have these other point of views included now that we know that this has occurred. I grew up very poor. It wasn't my mother who took me to the library. It wasn't my father. They were working, sometimes 2 jobs apiece. I went with my brothers. That was a different time period. Young kids could run around unsupervised and not be worried about getting abducted, supposedly, but that was that time. And we get on a bus and go downtown to the library. So nowadays, these parents are working very hard to the point where they don't really see their kids that much. They can't provide as much supervision. They can't even come over to, say, Trinity College Magnet School over here. When they hold parent-teacher conferences and stuff like that, parents can't show up because they're working. I mean, they're trying to make ends meet. Hartford is a very poor city, and the people here just don't have the time. So they can't get to the library. That's, to some extent, why it is that poor people don't take advantage that much of the library. And they haven't developed the skills yet because they're being exploited. So it's a bigger picture than what the library can handle. This is really a societal, nationwide concern. This would be my argument. People should have a living wage so they don't have to work 2 jobs and can spend time with their families. And a living wage in the state of Connecticut is probably, if you're going to go hourly, it's going to probably be $60 to $70 an hour. That's what a living wage is. So they can get all of their basic important needs met: childcare, food, housing, transportation, medical. I think it's a big ask of the library to try to figure out what to do with that.
Where would you be today if it were not for libraries?
Well, I wouldn't be a professor. I'll probably be still in the military. But I like to read. Even when, say, if people follow me on Twitter or on Facebook, I use it primarily to read and connect. People post some interesting articles, journal articles, even give you a PDF book for free. I get it and I read it and connect with people. That's how I know people around the world and travel so much, is through this media. So I use the media as a tool. I say it can be used that way. But what's happening in our country and in other countries around the world is that it's being used basically to sedate and not really inform, but to misinform. And if you have the ability, if you have the skills to see through the disinformation, which at this particular moment, the young people are showing that they have the skills to do this. I thought they would. Media literacy is very important. And the way you get media literacy is go to the library. That's the way you do it. You go to the library, you read about how these things are being used and why they're being used this way, and that these things are privately owned and they're not public. They can be problematic because all they're concerned about privately is making money. My mother was very conscientious, though she worked 2 jobs and stuff. She was very conscientious about her kids, and she wanted us to read. And so at that time, in the 1970s, it was the Encyclopedia Britannica. They used to go around to the door and knock on doors to sell them stuff. My mother made sure we had Encyclopedia Britannica. Any kind of encyclopedia that she could get, she made sure we had it in the house. And her son, me, read them from cover to cover. I was the only kid who did that in the family. I read everything from cover to cover. I even read the dictionary from cover to cover. I was constantly about doing that. And my mother knew I was that kind of a reader. And so she made sure to have those in the house, and my brothers could do it too. I'm from a family of 6 boys, so 5 other brothers who also had educations. But that's how important it was to us to have a library in the house. My mother made it so, to the point where then when we got to high school, she made sure we were all in advanced classes, not regular courses, advanced classes. And usually in my high school especially, usually I was the only black person in the damn class. And I didn't understand why. But my mother was on top of that stuff, even though she was working 2 jobs, as I said. So yeah, they come from all walks of life. And then that's how I met other people from other countries in the library in Little Rock. In Little Rock, I met people from Bolivia. First time, I was like, Bolivia, where is that? So they had to learn geography, find out what places are located and stuff. So people would come and talk to us. Different musicians would come and play for us. So a library is very, very important for spiking the curiosity, at least for me it was. And that could be for any family background, class background, national background, religious background. It's important. But it's also community because it creates connectedness. And I keep harping on that because I think people forget why libraries are there. It's for people to congregate, to learn together. The federal government itself, which started really after 9/11, is trying to basically curtail the kind of books that libraries have, the information that libraries hold. Anything that questioned the status quo, that is, we exist in a capitalist society, anything that questioned the ordinariness of capitalism is deemed to be problematic. And so they're going out to ban that. And where you find this kind of questioning is among, say, books that deal with race and class. That is really racism and economic exploitation. They want to ban those kinds of books and stuff. So then you get this critical race theory stuff. That book is really legal stuff. That's a legal theory. But they're trying to ban all of this stuff to stop, again, the real historical kind of information from coming to light. And this is not farewell for libraries. This is problematic. Libraries shouldn't be censored. But in the United States, there's a history of doing so, of censoring and book banning and stuff like that. And it's really because I think the country is fundamentally demographically being transformed. It will no longer be phenotypically white, and as a result, that's seen as a threat. And so they want to ban anything that talks about whiteness and a threat to whiteness existence. I used to live in Hartford for the first 8 years of my life when we first got here, from 1996 till 2003. I lived here. And me and my wife used to go all the time before we had kids. We had kids in 2003. We went constantly to the library. And it's where I met some of my closest friends who are even around today. I can give a hype for one. He goes to the Hartford Library to do jazz stuff. His name is Maurice Robinson, big-time jazz guy in Hartford, right? Jazz photographer, reporter. He played jazz over at UHart. That's where I got to know people in the community. So the legacy should be connecting in the library. But for me, right, I was connecting in the library and people were giving me new books to read and new things to experience in Hartford itself. As I said, it's a community. So that's the legacy I think that I should have about the library. It's the community that's being built and the kind of change that comes from it, and that the library should never be censored. It should be no holds barred. All the knowledge you want should be there. If you want it, go get it. If you don't have to read it. So don't try to tell other people what to read and limit them. So the legacy that I think the library should have is that you made me. You helped to make me.
Thank you for listening to 250 Stories, a production of HPL Studios at Hartford Public Library. This episode was written and produced by Christopher T. Brown, sound by Sam Sigmund, edited by Faith Lucas, and with photography and graphic design support from Hartford Public Library's communications team and the Hartford History Center. For more information on this project, visit www.hplstudios.hplct.org. New episodes release every Tuesday, so subscribe to stay tuned.